Hey guys, this is Nick, and here are some interesting Linux, open source and privacy news for the end of October 2020. This month we have increased competition on GPUs with AMD releasing new graphics cards, a lot of new distro releases with Ubuntu, Fedora and PopOS, and YouTube-DL being taken down for alleged copyright infringement. Oh, and Google also gets hit by a lawsuit for monopolistic practices. Do you know who doesn't have a monopoly? This video sponsor, which is myself. Just a quick reminder that if you want to stay on top of what I make, you can follow me on Twitter or mastodon.social @thelinuxexp, and you can also find all my videos on library if you prefer. I also run a second channel dedicated to Linux gaming, which is very originally named The Linux Gaming Experiment. Check it out if you want to see some very bad gameplay and some swearing. Finally, if you want to help support the channel, you can join my amazing patrons and YouTube members following the links in the description and get access to a monthly patroncast and the right to vote on the next topics I'll cover on the channel. I also have some merch that you can buy to help me get even richer, so if you're in need of nerdy t-shirts, mugs or other pieces of apparel, head over to the link in the description. Now, onto the news. Okay, so let's start with the Linux news. A member of the KDE team has published a good article about the transition to Wayland, its integration with Plasma, and the KwinFT fork that aims to better support Wayland in KDE. He basically explains why the transition is taking a long time, and the blog post strikes a good balance between technicity and ease of comprehension. The TLDR seems to be, it's taking a long time because we don't want to ship something half-baked, and because the community hasn't always agreed on how Wayland is the first priority for KDE and Plasma. He also points out that the KwinFT fork might also detract from this transition by splitting the development efforts, and that the proposed changes could have been contributed to Kwin directly instead of forking it. Ubuntu 20.10 was released, bringing a fresh GNOME 3.38 desktop with a bunch of changes. The ability to manually reorder icons in the app grid and in folders, better support for fingerprint readers, better connection sharing through a QR code, a new icon theme from LibreOffice to match the Yaru icons, and a bunch of other smaller changes. I made a video about this, check it out using the card up top. I also added some personal reflections on where the Ubuntu desktop is headed, because distro reviews without more context are boring to make. PopOS 20.10 was also released, bringing the same enhancements as what Ubuntu 20.10 brought to the table, with a few specific tweaks of their own. Their theme and icons are still there, and they added support for a new sources.list file format, which makes the sources a lot easier to read. They also improved their already pretty good tiling features with the ability to stack tiled windows on top of each other, with the necessary keyboard shortcuts as well. Some floating windows are also exempted from the default tiling behavior to avoid weird-looking results. Finally, the PopOS team has also added support for fractional scaling and the ability to use an external monitor in hybrid graphics machines without rebooting when switching to the NVIDIA card, which is a great feature. PopOS is not just a rethemed version of Ubuntu anymore, it's taking on a mind of its own, and I like where it's going. The flurry of distro releases continues with Fedora 33, also based on GNOME 3.38, for which I have a dedicated video, check it out in the card up top. It has features that Ubuntu didn't use, so it warranted 2 separate videos. Fedora 33 also moved to BDRFS by default, which better supports SSDs and allows for super easy system snapshots and backups. Fedora also adds an animated background based on the time of day as the default. A lot of packages also have been updated, and Nano is now the default text editor in Fedora. On to the open source news. A major piece of open source software is currently dormant. CUPS, CUPS, the printing system used by most, if not all Linux distributions, seem dormant. The project was led by Apple, but it seems the lead developer, after leaving Apple in 2019, hasn't really been replaced. For the whole of 2020, that repo only got 1 commit, compared to 355 in 2019. Fortunately, the project is open source, and people can always pick it back up if Apple decides to completely drop it at some point, and a temporary fork has already been started, ready to be remerged into the main project if Apple ever decides to start giving a crap again. The NVIDIA drivers seem broken with the Linux kernel 5.9, so if you're using an NVIDIA card, you're better off waiting a bit before moving to the latest release. NVIDIA made an announcement that the latest kernel release was incompatible with their drivers and asked people to wait for mid-November for an update that adds support. It seems to be a problem with GPL licensing and kernel modules. A patch was added to the kernel to basically prevent the GPL condom tactic of adding a GPL license bit that would load another non-open source blob software. Nvidia is working on it, so just be patient before upgrading and everything should be fine in a few days. YouTube DL, the super popular tool that allows people to download YouTube videos, has been taken down for copyright infringement. Its GitHub repo is now removed because it seems to violate some section of US copyright law that bans stuff that gets around DRM. My opinion is that this is ridiculous. YouTube DL could have been used for copyright infringement, but it also had plenty of legitimate uses, like downloading copyrightless videos or your own stuff off of your own channel. It would be like taking down any torrent client because it can be used to download pirated content. Or if we go back a long time in the past, taking down cassette tape players because you could record songs from the radio onto blank tapes. Fortunately, the project can probably be brought back from that, since its code was open, and people might have copies of it laying around on their hard drives. The Snap team is working on fixing one of the biggest annoyances of their software distribution method, and that's load times. Using the LZO compression algorithm, they found they could improve cold launch times of the Chromium Snap by 40 to 74% and achieve comparable launch times with the dev version of Chromium. It even starts faster than the RPM package available on Fedora. This has one drawback though: the LZO algorithm results in bigger packages. The previous Chromium Snap was at around 150 megabytes and the new one could reach 250, so you're gaining launch time at the expense of storage space, which, in my opinion, is a very acceptable trade-off. People with metered connections or small drives will probably disagree. Now, in terms of hardware, we only have one piece of news, which is that System 76 released the Thelio Mega, the most powerful installment of their Thelio line of desktops. These things use AMD Threadrippers, with GPUs ranging from RTX 2080 Ti's to Quadro RTX 8000 with up to 256GB of RAM and 10GB Ethernet. As always, the design and build look amazing. You can choose various finishes for the wood side paneling, and they are easy to upgrade and service, and they also cost an arm and a leg, starting at $7,500 all the way up to $45,000 for the top spec machine. These things are into Mac Pro territory in the financial department, but they also bring an amazing design and performance for the price. Now, if I could just get a regular Thelio delivered to France, I'd be happy. Now let's move on to the applications, and it's mainly browser news here because Microsoft Edge has its first preview release on Linux, and OMG Ubuntu gave it a shot. The Chromium-based browser brings some small touches and features that aren't found in the base browser, like improved bookmarks capabilities. It doesn't integrate all that well with Linux, apart from providing some quick actions from the right-click menu on its icon for desktops that support it, and it uses Windows-like title bars. Microsoft Account Sync is also not supported yet, but it will come later. Edge supports Chrome extensions and works as you'd expect a Chromium browser to work, which is pretty well if you have loads of RAM. I don't know who the target for Edge on Linux is, but I'm sure it will find an audience. Now, apart from Edge, Firefox also got a new release, version 82. This update blocks malicious downloads that you didn't ask for and notifies you so you can allow the download if it seems legit. And performance has also been improved, with Flexbox layouts loading 20% faster and restoring a session taking 17% less time. They've also worked on improving Pocket, the read it later service Mozilla bought and integrated into Firefox, with a new look for the saving UI and more story recommendations. Finally, the Firefox account now syncs a lot more settings like scrolling, picture-in-picture, or on-screen keyboard settings. The picture-in-picture button has also been redesigned, but I must say I prefer the old one, which was a lot less visible and intruded less on the video. Now let's move on to gaming news. Wine 5.20 was released, bringing more work on cryptographic providers, some fixes for rich edit, and 36 bug fixes, including for Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord, Saints Row 2, Stellaris, The Sims Complete Collection, Metro Exodus, Alan Wake, Battlefield 3, Watch Dogs, or Sniper Elite V2 Remastered. AMD revealed their RDNA 2 architecture with the Radeon 6000 series in tow. The RX 6900 XT, 6800 XT, and 6800 are the new graphics cards based on that architecture, and they seem to be able to challenge Nvidia even on the higher end of the spectrum. These cards seem like powerhouses, and as always, I'd expect them to be supported by the open source AMD drivers pretty quickly. AMD now seems to be positioned to be the best choice for CPUs and GPUs, especially on Linux, where support for their hardware is just stellar compared to the Nvidia drivers. Speaking of those, Nvidia released a new version of their Linux drivers, version 455.38. It adds support for the newly released and already impossible to buy RTX 3070 and fixes some bugs and performance regressions. It also adds AMD secure memory encryption compatibility. Users of a rolling release should get this immediately, and for the Ubuntu users, there's always the graphics drivers PPA if you can't wait for it to be packaged. And let's complete this video with a little bit of privacy and monopoly news on the web. Google was hit by a lawsuit by the US Department of Justice for illegal monopoly in search and search ads. What's pointed at specifically is the way Google signs deals with major providers like Apple, telecom operators, or mobile carriers to secure the default search engine position, something no competitor could do since Google has so much money it can overbid anyone else in the field. Google's defense of "people use us because they want to, not because they have to" is deeply flawed in my opinion, since as Google clearly is a monopoly here, obviously people wouldn't even be aware of the many alternatives there are out there. Apple has been rumored to work on their own search engine lately, and if that proves to be true, Google can say goodbye to a sizable chunk of the phone and tablet market for default search, which might very well make them reconsider some monopolistic behaviors. We'll see how this works out. And that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, don't hesitate to like or dislike if you didn't. You can also subscribe and turn on notifications for more videos like this one. And if you really did enjoy the video, don't hesitate to check the various links in the description. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!